Hello there, and welcome to the scruffy-looking Nerd Herders podcast. I am your host, Tyler, bringing you news on all things nerd and geek related. And this week's rundown has me so excited, but parts of it also make me sad. So, here we go. Starting things off in the gaming report, this comes from Jason Schreier from Kotaku. Electronic Arts has canceled its open-world Star Wars game. According to three people familiar with goings-on at the company, the game, announced alongside the shutdown of Visceral Games back in 2017, had been in development at EA's office in Vancouver. EA Vancouver, a large studio that mostly handles support for a variety of the publisher's games, including FIFA and Battlefront, had been working on this open-world Star Wars game since October of 2017, when EA closed Visceral Games. Until then, Visceral, best known for its popular Dead Space horror series, was developing its own Star Wars game. That project, codenamed Ragtag, was a linear action-adventure game directed by Uncharted director Amy Hennig. EA Vancouver had been assisting on the project, and when EA closed Visceral Games on October 17, 2017, the Vancouver studio took it over. But it wouldn't be accurate to say that EA Vancouver's Star Wars was the same game as Ragtag, because when they took it over, they completely rebooted the Star Wars project entirely, keeping some of the art assets but transforming it into an open-world game. Now, that project is canceled too. EA did not immediately respond to a request for comment. EA had not shown any of EA Vancouver's open-world Star Wars game publicly, but the publisher talked about it when it announced Visceral's demise. Quote, "It has become clear that to deliver an experience that players will want to come back to and enjoy for a long time to come, we needed to pivot the design," the company said at the time. Continuing, a development team from across EA Worldwide Studios will take over development of this game, led by a team from EA Vancouver that has already been working on the project. In June 2018, EA announced that it had expanded its Motive studio, previously a single office in Montreal led by industry veteran Jade Raymond, to a Vancouver location as well. That one would also be located in the publisher's large office in Burnaby, British Columbia, as the division of EA Vancouver. On October 22, 2018, EA announced that it had installed executive Samantha Ryan to oversee Motive. Subsequently, Raymond left the company. It's not clear what EA Vancouver's next new game will be. We've heard it might be a different Star Wars project. Respawn, the Los Angeles-based studio responsible for Titanfall, is also making a Star Wars game called Jedi Fallen Order. That game is currently scheduled for fall 2019. And that same day, at 10:17 p.m., he updated the article. "Since the publication of this article, I've talked to several more people familiar with EA Vancouver's now canceled open-world Star Wars game. This project, which was codenamed Orca, was very early in development, but would involve playing as a scoundrel or bounty hunter who could explore various open-world planets and work with different factions across the Star Wars universe." God, fans have been wanting that for so long. And when EA's top decision makers looked at their roadmap for the next few years, they decided that they needed something earlier than the planned release date for Orca, according to two people familiar with what happened. So they canceled Orca in favor of a smaller scale Star Wars project that's now aimed for a much sooner, likely late 2020 release, which also happens to be around the time that I've heard next-gen consoles will launch. In parentheses, he says it might be a bit earlier, might be a bit later. From what I've heard, next-gen plans are definitely still in flux. He continues, to EA's credit, those people said the publisher did not lay anyone off as part of this transition. This news comes at a time of cost-cutting across the industry at major publishers, including both EA and Activision, as previously reported. Some at the studio also hope that Orca might be restarted after this project is finished in the future. And then there was a second update. As of yesterday at 1:40 p.m., the day after the publication of that article, EA sent over the following statement to Kotaku. They said, "There's been speculation overnight about one of our Star Wars projects. As a natural part of the creative process, the great work by our team in Vancouver continues and will evolve into future Star Wars content and games. We're fully committed to making more Star Wars games. We're very excited about Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order from Respawn, and we'll share more about our new projects when the time is right. AKA word just salad. That's what that is. It's just non-answers. My take on this is, as a Star Wars fan and a video game fan, this has just been embarrassing. EA signed this exclusive deal with Disney and is essentially 10 years with this deal. We're just over the halfway point through this deal, and let's see what they've done so far. One, they've put out a Battlefront game, one that didn't have a campaign, and then two, a second Battlefront game that ended up being a major embarrassment, not just in the gaming community for EA and DICE, but for Disney as well. They were catching heat from that game to the point that Disney had to call in to EA and tell them to sort their shit out, because it shouldn't have been in the upper echelon of Disney having to figure that stuff out. And EA had to quickly fix that problem and publicly apologize. Now, playing Battlefront 2 now, that game is phenomenal. I still stand that game is one of the best shooters I've played in a while. But then EA had number 3. They had a Star Wars Uncharted style game that was being helmed by the writer of the Uncharted games, and who is arguably one of the best storytellers in the game industry currently. And that game looked amazing. Canceled that one. And then they pushed all of those assets from that game over to Project Orca. Canceled that one. Now there's Jedi Fallen Order. So 5 games. 3 that are canceled, 1 that's unreleased from Respawn. And Star Wars is ultimately about the story. So when they pushed out the first Battlefront to meet their deadline for The Force Awakens, it was unfinished, it was rushed, and it didn't have a story. It was just soldiers aimlessly fighting each other, and it wasn't compelling. It was just rinse, repeat. And games like Overwatch can get away with that, because there wasn't an established story. There wasn't that established lore as of yet. So games like Overwatch can get away with that. Games like Call of Duty can get away with that. All you need to know is, oh, I'm shooting bad guys, or I'm just shooting an enemy team. That's all you need to know. But with Star Wars, it's always been about the story. It's always been about the theatrics of it. And that wasn't in the first Battlefront game. Then they released the second Battlefront, and while it did have a tremendous storyline, and I even read the tie-in novel, which was phenomenal, by the way, you should go check it out. It was just surrounded by that whole loot box fiasco, and that really tarnished that game. And if they hadn't have done that, like that game would have been like that moment of, oh, okay, they're definitely going in the right direction. And then there was the Uncharted Star Wars game, which why wouldn't they continue on with that? Like, that's the kind of thing people want. They want that next KOTOR. They want that next KOTOR 2. They want that. They want the next Jedi Outcast. It got canceled. And then Orca got canceled. And now all eyes are on Respawn with Jedi Fallen Order. Those poor bastards. Oh God, I just feel so bad for them. It's like all the pressure's on them. And since this deal has been started, there has been twice as many movies, Star Wars movies, released as games. And if I were the one making the decisions at Disney, whether like with the games division, then I would be trying to find a way to get out of this deal with EA. Because I know Disney has an army of lawyers. They've personally sent me, when I did graphic design, cease and desists on fan art and stuff like that. So I know they have an army of lawyers that know how to write a contract that will always end up in their favor. So I would tell EA, if I were that person, look, whatever games you guys have currently in development, you can release them, but do not start any more. You guys have squandered what we've given you. then I would announce that Lucasfilm / Disney are going to be accepting pitches on new Star Wars games. Like, developers, come at us. Give us what you can. Give us what you want. If you want to do, and even indie developers, if they want to do like small focused story focused, story driven games, like, do that. Like, yes, do that. That's a great. Even you want to do an indie game about an Ewok trying to find his lost village. Yes, let's do that. Make that game. Do it, because I guarantee you it'd be better than the games we won't ever see from EA. And furthermore, if I were a shareholder at EA, I would be fucking furious at how this company has just, like I said, squandered their license with this Star Wars franchise. This is the mother lode of franchises. I'd put Star Wars literally as one of the top franchises for video games to be able to get the licensing to. And what's even more frustrating is that, like I said, they seemed to be making the right steps during all their mishaps. They had some solid games lined up that could have, honestly, I know they could have been contenders for Game of the Year. They easily could have. And if they want that, Lucasfilm, rather, rest in peace, LucasArts, Lucasfilm and Disney should be looking at what the Marvel Games division has been doing with their video games. Insomniac Spider-Man was a huge success. Marvel Puzzle Quest from D3 has been extremely successful. Marvel Ultimate Alliance is coming to the Switch. Look what they're doing. Do that. They should be letting whoever, like whatever developer, come to them with game pitches and start putting out great games again. Make Star Wars great again. But I understand that their thing is now, because back then LucasArts was really bad and like Lucasfilms was really bad about really muddying up their canon storyline. And that's why Disney is picky about their comics, their novels, their games, all that now. So they would still have to do approvals on storylines and what characters are being used where, because they would still want a coherent world being built. And I completely understand that. But I will end this story with this tidbit from a meme that I had seen on Twitter the other day. From 2002 to 2006, 4 years, we got Jedi Knight 2, Jedi Knight, Star Wars Galaxies, KOTOR, Battlefront, Republic Commando, Battlefront 2, Lego Star Wars, KOTOR 2, Lego Star Wars 2, and Empire at War. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 solid games within a 4-year period of Star Wars games. Since 2013, when this deal with EA was made, till now, 2019, that's 6 years, we've gotten Battlefront, Battlefront 2. And that's it. Something to think about. Moving on to next in the gaming report. This also comes from Kotaku, a day after apologizing for surprising Assassin's Creed Odyssey players with a mandatory in-game relationship that seemed to contradict the game's pre-release promise to let players define their character's own sexuality. The game's creative director offered a fuller apology and explanation of what his team was trying to accomplish and what they got wrong. Odyssey creative director Jonathan Dumont said in a post on the game's forums, quote, "The intention of this story was to explain how your character's bloodline has a lasting impact on the assassins, but looking through your responses, it is clear that we missed the mark." He went on to say that players will not have to continue the romantic relationship in the next installment of the game's downloadable content, saying the developers wanted players to have the option of deciding that their character's choice to procreate was a utilitarian decision rather than a romantic one. This seemed to contradict the repeated push by Odyssey's creators in advance of the game's release to portray the game as an adventure so malleable that players could choose their own romantic partners, whether they be male or female. Today, Dumont skipped past any spoiler worries and product hype and offered a clear explanation of what the team was going to be doing in the future. He said, "We have read your responses online and taken them to heart. This has been a learning experience for us, understanding how attached you feel to your Cassandra or your Alexios is a humbling, and knowing we let you down is not something we take lightly. We'll work to do better and make sure the element of player choice in Assassin's Creed Odyssey carries through our DLC content so you can stay true to the character you have embodied throughout. My take on this, I think it's great. Ubisoft is doubling down on their apology and understanding that it's essentially forcing people away from the openness that the game promoted and continues to promote, and it was upsetting for fans. But on the flip side, they can't undo what they've done. But I think the best they can do is exactly what they've done. I don't think there's much more they could do now because it's already been released, it's already been done. And I don't personally take this as seriously as others have. And not to take away from how they perceive it, but from a storytelling perspective, it's not just the player's story. It's Ubisoft's story as well. They're telling the story. So few games have actually allowed you to completely choose who you're in a romantic relationship with. Mass Effect and Dragon Age definitely paved the way for this, but not to the level that Odyssey has let players. So I also understand, once again, where the players are coming from, because it was their choice, their character's orientation of how they wanted their character to be, and this kind of broke that personal lore that they've built with their characters. So I also understand that as well. Moving on to movie news. This is the good stuff here. Only hours after it was confirmed that a new Ghostbusters movie was in the works, a teaser trailer popped up online. The teaser opens on a shot of a tattered looking barn. As it pans in, Elmer Bernstein's score from the library scene of the original Ghostbusters plays in the background. And then the shot reveals someone working on a machine inside of the barn. We see strands of ectoplasm, and as the person succeeds in activating the device they were working on, we see sparks similar to the beams from a proton pack. Right at the end, the wind picks up, pulling a cover off of the original Ecto-1. So, the original Ghostbusters was one of the 3 VHS tapes that I completely wore out from watching it over and over and over. And my parents had bought 3 copies of that movie over the years. It was the first Ghostbusters, Empire Strikes Back, and Aliens. Those 3 movies, I completely wore them out. Ghostbusters 2 was always more of like a goofy, campy, fun movie for me. I still enjoyed it. And I didn't hate the 2016 Ghostbusters movie. And even though there's rumors already flying around all over the internet that this new one won't feature the original Ghostbusters squad as the Ghostbusters, I'm still completely stoked for this movie. I honestly feel that Sony should do a multiverse with these movies. I think they should follow what they did with Into the Spider-Verse and follow what IDW Publishing has done with their Ghostbuster comics. Have all the different versions of the Ghostbusters crossover, and if they even did an animation movie with it and have the actors reprise their roles, that'd be pretty badass too. But with the 2020 movie, I'm not saying it needs to mention or have the 2016 characters fully reprise their roles or anything like that. I'm not saying that. But imagine in, like, when the credits roll midway through or after they're over, there's a scene where one of the 2016 characters comes through like a portal in front of the OG Ghostbusters and is just like, we need help or something. And it would satisfy the main problem that I've seen from the majority of people that had the problem that they had with the reboot, which was that it had no connection to the original movies outside of Egon being a scientist in the movie. Like, that was the only thing connecting them. And people felt like they were trying to retcon the original story. So I feel like this would be a way to alleviate that. But what I think will likely happen is that they'll just do this one last hurrah with the OG Ghostbusters and close the book on that chapter of the franchise, because the original cast is old, and I don't foresee this being the first in many more adventures with these guys outside of cameos, or to actually pass the torch to younger Ghostbusters. And like I said, for those who remember or for those who didn't watch the movie, Egon Spengler was an established scientist in the 2016 Ghostbusters. He was credited as the pioneer in the proton pack technology that Holtzman perfects in the movie. Now, it's possible that the Egon from that universe and the OG Egon were both simultaneously working on something that could allow them to cross over into different dimensions and travel across dimensions. Now, maybe something like this was what Sony's intentions were from the start, but then they backed down due to the fan backlash and the heat they were getting over their marketing. We'll probably never know for sure until Sony's emails get leaked again in the future and we can read up on the stuff with Ghostbusters that they had to say. But I'm hoping that this movie may spark more interest from a younger audience, because if the franchise is just going to keep appeasing and placating to the older aging fans, then once all these older aging fans die, the franchise isn't going to have much longevity. And that's one thing that was kind of a shame, because younger fans really, from what I gathered, really enjoyed the 2016 Ghostbusters movie. I enjoyed the majority of it. Like, the first 2 acts of the movie were good, and it kind of floundered in the 3rd act. For them, they need their own Ghostbusters too. Their own Ghostbusters as well, not Ghostbusters 2. They need their own Ghostbusters as well for their generation. Like, having the older ones is great. It's just like with Star Wars. There's the older generation that had the original trilogy. Then there was the next generation, not Star Trek, but the next generation of fans that had their generation of movies with the prequels. And then now there's this next generation that has the sequel trilogy. So each generation should have their own Ghostbusters. That's how I think it should go. And having a multiverse would be a fantastic way for them to be able to expand and have across different dimensions, across different universes, where there's all these different kinds of Ghostbusters, that they can continue to tell these stories with new storylines, but with new Ghostbusters. And I think that'd be great. I'm personally excited to see what the Ghostbusters universe still has to offer, whether it's with Aykroyd, Murray, and Hudson or not, is basically what I'm saying. So I'm excited for this. 2020 couldn't get here soon enough. Also, don't change the theme song. Ray Parker Jr.'s version is just fine, but bring back Ecto Cooler, like a full release, not, oh, there's a case at this one Walmart in the middle of Podunk, Oklahoma. Not that. A full Ecto Cooler release. Take notes, Sony. And lastly, in movie news, Spider-Man trailer frickin' released. It's so good. The sequel, which will premiere this summer, follows Peter Parker as he adjusts to his life as a public hero. With millions sold on his vigilante shtick, Peter gets hit with fatigue as he heads into summer vacation. And he decides a class trip to Europe will ease his mind. So it's basically Spider-Man Euro trip. That is until he learns Nick Fury has got him marked. Peter gets a little free time abroad before the former S.H.I.E.L.D. director slinks in from the shadows and Spider-Man is thrust onto the global superhero stage. We got to see Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio, and holy crap does he look badass. We got to see Sandman, Hydro Man. I literally watched this trailer like 15 times. It's so good. But a couple months ago, Gyllenhaal was at CCXP, which is a convention, but he went on to say there are these threats to the world like elementals, or the elementals, elemental creatures, and Mysterio is someone who knows about them and wants to make sure that the world is safe from them, Gyllenhaal said at that convention, where he revealed Mysterio is working under Nick Fury. Now, like I said, I watched this trailer like 15 times, maybe more. I lost count, but there were several things that I had noticed that were kind of Easter eggy, I guess. And then I went on to Reddit to see if there was others. I found a couple others, so I'm going to read the ones I found first and then read the ones that I found on Reddit. So one thing that I noticed, as Peter packs to go to the school trip, he stuffs a really old suitcase full of clothes but you can see that it belonged to his late uncle Ben Parker, who we haven't seen yet in the MCU. But I thought that was a nice little Easter egg that it was Uncle Ben's suitcase. Another that I noticed when Peter picks up his passport, it reveals he was born on August 10th, which is the same date Amazing Fantasy number 15 released in 1962, bringing with it the first debut of the Amazing Spider-Man. And when Peter and his friends were on the gondola ride in Venice, their ride is interrupted by a huge, tall water monster resembling the Spider-Man villain, Hydro Man. And a nearby boat behind Ned has the name ASM-212, which stood for Amazing Spider-Man 212. The first appearance of Morris Bench, a small-time crook who came to possess the ability to transform his entire physical form into water. Pretty cool that they did that. And if I would have been astute and paying attention a little bit more in my multiple viewings of this, I would have noticed that, this is from Reddit, I would have noticed that the scene where Nick Fury and Maria Hill can be seen opening fire on a creature composed of earth who bears a significant resemblance to the enemy Sandman, though he appears to be more rock than sand. A visible license plate directly in front of Nick Fury reads 463, which they say the plate could be a nod to the 1963's Amazing Spider-Man number 4, the first appearance of the villain Sandman. Then there's another part in the trailer which has MJ, Ned, and the character Betty fleeing from a fiery attack on the London Bridge, which appears to be under assault by a lava-like creature and a potentially wind-inducing cohort. Another license plate spotted next to MJ reads 2865 SEP, pointing to the first appearance of Mark Raxton, aka Molten Man, in The Amazing Spider-Man number 28, dated September 1965. Very cool that they were able to kind of sneak those in under the radar. Very, very cool. And I think it's a great nod to longtime comic book fans as well to have those kinds of things in there. Super cool. I'm sure there were some that I missed. There's probably some that I haven't came across yet on the internet. But if there were some others that you had seen in the trailer, comment them. Let me know. That way I can check them out and see if I can find it. But Spider-Man Far From Home swings into theaters on July 5th. And last thing on the list for this episode is tabletop games. My buddy Anth Oni linked me to this, so shout out to Anth Oni. A new co-op board game set in Middle-earth is on its way from Fantasy Flight Games. The Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth seems like it will be fairly similar to the fans of other Fantasy Flight games such as Mansions of Madness. But there are some differences. First, there will be 2 maps instead of 1. One is a journey map, which is a larger map that shows the area you're in as you go on your quests. Then, when you need to enter combat, you'll use the battle map. The map is smaller and shows a zoomed-in area where your characters and enemies will be. Next, another difference is that you won't be using dice for your skill checks. Rather, flipping the script for a skill deck where you draw cards in order to overcome the enemies and obstacles. You can now pre-order Lord of the Rings Journeys in Middle-earth, and if you pre-order directly through Fantasy Flight Games, you will receive 5 deluxe player mats, 1 for each player. And for those who are not aware, Fantasy Flight Games makes tremendous games. They have been making really, really great Star Wars games. They're the ones in charge of the newer Star Wars tabletop RPGs. They have been doing stuff with Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. They've been doing stuff with Game of Thrones. Tremendous games. If you're new to tabletop games, they're relatively easy to learn. They're a lot of fun. So go check out Fantasy Flight Games. Pre-order this if you want, or order another game that tickles your fancy. So this brings me to the end of the episode, and I just want to start this off with thanking all of you for your continuing support. I plan on continuing to grow this podcast, and you guys make that possible. Keep your eye out in the very near future for a Patreon link, and there will be a couple tiers. I'm going to have a Discord server so where you can hang out, we can shoot the shit and post links to each other, memes, all that good stuff. If you guys are new to the show and you don't know where to find me, you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at SLNH Podcast or at www.slnhpodcast.com. I am on iTunes, I'm on Spotify, I'm on Stitcher, I'm on Podbean. If you are on iTunes Podcasts, go ahead and give me a 5-star rating because it helps me boost up through the ratings, and that gets more people to see my show, which means more listeners, which means I can do more stuff for you guys. And I'm going to be having it's kind of a small giveaway, and so keep an eye out on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook for that announcement. So, this has been the Scruffy Looking Nerd Herders podcast. I'm your host, Tyler, signing off, and may the Force be with you.